8-year-old Jane followed her father to attend her cousin's wedding. This was the first joyful event for the family since Jane's mother passed away. The atmosphere at the wedding was peaceful, with happy crowds everywhere. However, just before the ceremony began, the cousin discovered that her wedding dress was damaged. Such an accident happening at such an important moment in life made the cousin very upset. This scene happened to be witnessed by young Jane. Using her sister's ribbon, Jane cleverly helped her cousin fix the wedding dress, saving her cousin's wedding. This made the cousin smile with joy and invite Jane to be the flower girl holding the wedding dress train. Holding the beautiful wedding dress and seeing the happy smiles of the newlyweds, Jane felt unparalleled joy and satisfaction. She understood that it was because she had provided help on her cousin's most important day. She loved this feeling very much and looked forward to her own day coming. Because of this thought, Jane became a wedding enthusiast as an adult, known as the perfect bridesmaid. She frequently attended her friends' weddings, served as a bridesmaid, and always prepared thoroughly, handling various emergencies for the bride. She even rushed to 2 weddings of different styles in one night, traveling between 2 locations. To do this, Jane didn't hesitate to spend $300 on a taxi, changing clothes in the car to save time. To avoid delaying her friend's wedding, Jane frequently checked the time, looking anxious. This unusual behavior caught the attention of a man. The man's name was Kevin, and he was a journalist. When Jane was knocked unconscious while fighting for the bouquet, Kevin took the opportunity to take her home. In the taxi, Kevin asked Jane why she attended 2 weddings in one night. Jane smiled and replied that both sides were close friends, and she couldn't favor either. Kevin noticed Jane's love for weddings and did not hide his disdain. He thought weddings were cumbersome, complicated, and time-consuming, but Jane enjoyed them and even openly stated that she liked weddings. Kevin sarcastically quoted a line from the New Testament of the Bible, "Love is patient, love is kind." Jane recognized his sarcasm but was not angry. She simply asked what he did for a living. Kevin claimed to be a writer. Jane smiled in understanding, thinking Kevin was there to collect material for weddings. No matter how much Kevin belittled weddings, Jane insisted on their beauty, which made Kevin find her interesting and look forward to seeing her again at weddings. Jane did not look forward to reuniting with him. They had little in common. She firmly said goodbye to Kevin, secretly hoping to never see him again. After sending Jane off, Kevin recalled the scene and couldn't help but smile. At that moment, Kevin found Jane's notebook for recording weddings in the taxi. After returning home, Jane struggled to put the new bridesmaid dress she received that day into her closet. Her closet was nearly full, but Jane still managed to hang the dress inside. Of course, when she closed the cabinet door and turned around, the cabinet door was quickly popped open again. After tidying up her dress, Jane happily sat on the sofa humming a tune and began reading her favorite newspaper column on wedding vows. However, she never expected that Kevin, whom she had just met, was the writer for that column. But Kevin did not like weddings, nor did he enjoy the vows column he was responsible for, despite being featured on the front page being regarded as every bride's dream. Due to past experiences, he remained reserved about it and even decided to use Jane and her notebook to negotiate a transfer. He took the notebook to negotiate with the editor-in-chief, and when the editor-in-chief still did not agree, Kevin proposed that if this report could create a sensation, he would agree to the transfer. The editor-in-chief, exasperated, agreed to this condition. At this point, Jane discovered that her notebook was missing. After inquiring with the property management office, she began handling work for her boss, George. But she still did not know that the lost notebook would bring her great trouble. Jane was George's public relations assistant and had a crush on him for many years, taking care of him meticulously. However, her work environment that day was not quiet, as her friend Casey was nearby, making some insinuating remarks. Jane's blind attitude made it hard for him to watch. In response to Casey's sarcastic comments, Jane insisted that she was just passionate about her work, but her inability to hide her smile at the sight of George's photo had already betrayed her feelings. At that moment, a gentleman came over holding a bouquet, claiming it was flowers for Jane. Jane was overjoyed, thinking it was from George, believing her secret crush was about to bear fruit. Her reaction was very obvious, yet she thought she was hiding it well. Casey couldn't help but tease Jane about her girlish feelings, as almost everyone around them, except for George himself, knew that Jane liked him. But George was a dense person. Even when Jane brightly asked about his mountain climbing experience and accurately stated that this was his 8th ascent of Mount Whitney, George did not perceive her feelings. He only focused on the work in front of Jane and recognized that Jane was indeed a considerate assistant. Meanwhile, Casey, who was following Jane and listening to her report, was almost rolling his eyes to the ceiling. Why was such a good girl like Jane so fixated on one man? Additionally, when he heard that attending the dinner required bringing a partner, George blurted out that this was the only thing he did not need Jane to arrange. Upon hearing this, Jane clearly became disappointed. Casey really wanted to wake up his friend. After hearing Jane absent-mindedly respond to George's polite remarks, Casey acted on his thoughts and unceremoniously slapped Jane. The sting on her cheek made Jane a little more alert, and she admitted that she had indeed been overly emotional. However, the blow that would completely awaken her was about to come. After work, Jane politely declined Casey's invitation to the party as she had other plans, picking up her sister Tess from the airport. The airport was crowded and noisy, but Jane spotted her sister at a glance. Tess was strikingly beautiful and cheerful, and had always been popular with the opposite sex since childhood. Even in a place like the airport, there were men who actively offered to help her with her luggage. Jane felt helpless about this, but Tess had been away for work for a long time, and the sisters hadn't seen each other in ages, so Jane missed her dearly. Tess returned this time because her work had been light recently, so she declined her boyfriend's company and decided to come home alone for a visit. The sisters returned home harmoniously. Tess, excited after a long absence, wandered around the house. She picked up a photo frame on the table, which contained an old newspaper reporting their parents' wedding. Tess couldn't help but recall that her mother was the same age as she was now when she got married. Their vibrant parents held what could be called a perfect wedding. Tess thought her mother's wedding dress was the only regret, while Jane felt everything was perfect. Tess then saw a neatly cut newspaper with their vows and curiously lifted it up. Jane hurriedly snatched it back, incoherently explaining that it was a newspaper to be recycled just because the article written by Malcolm resonated with her. But Tess wasn't very interested in that. Seeing her sister busy applying skincare products, Jane changed the subject and asked if she would attend her colleague's party that night. Tess initially declined, seeming to have something on her mind, but after Jane's persistent persuasion, she agreed to go. The atmosphere at the party that night was lively. Jane and Casey leaned against the edge of the dance floor chatting. Just as Casey was giving Jane advice on how to impress George, George came over and interrupted the conversation, asking Jane if she had seen something he left on the table. Since they didn't have a special relationship, he hoped Jane would understand. Jane's face lit up with happiness. After all, if she were to say which gift she received today might be from George, it would undoubtedly be the bouquet of flowers from the morning. Casey encouraged Jane to seize the opportunity and confess her feelings to George. Jane felt a surge of courage at that moment, but this excitement quickly faded. She saw George walking to the other side of the dance floor, and her sister was also heading towards George. Feelings quickly blossomed in the eyes of the two, as they only had eyes for each other. Tess, realizing too late, noticed Jane had come up beside her. Hearing George talk about the dry cleaning receipt he left on Jane's table, Jane finally forced a smile. Jane realized she had once again been overly sentimental, while her sister was winning the heart of the person she loved. As for the bouquet, it was from Kevin, whose views did not align with hers. Jane looked at Kevin, forced a polite smile, then handed him her glass and stormed off to the terrace to vent her emotions. The sudden shout drew everyone's attention. Kevin increasingly found Jane interesting, but he hadn't forgotten his purpose. He was there to return the notebook. If possible, he also wanted to learn more about Jane, and sharing a drink would be a good way to do that. Jane was in a bad mood and unceremoniously rejected Kevin. However, Kevin's goal had already been half achieved. The anger continued to burn in Jane after she got home. She tossed and turned, unable to sleep, so she got up to do housework, talking herself through it. Tess returned in the early morning, clearly having had a pleasant night. Tess had a good impression of George and asked her sister to share more about him. Looking into her sister's eyes, Jane couldn't refuse. With the information she got from her sister, Tess was willing to hide her true preferences to please George. She falsely claimed to be a vegetarian, love small animals, and enjoy sports, which caught George's attention. As she wished, their relationship quickly heated up, and George soon proposed to Tess. Jane's father was very happy upon hearing this, and took out her mother's wedding dress to give to Tess. If Jane had only felt sad when she saw Tess and George together before, at this moment, that emotion had escalated to pain, feeling suffocated. Jane had always hoped to have a perfect wedding like her parents, wearing her mother's wedding dress and walking towards her beloved with a smile. But now, her mother's wedding dress was going to her sister. Indeed, the shattered dream made Jane's heart ache, but she loved her sister more, so she smiled and blessed her, though the pain remained in her heart. Jane recalled that not long ago, Kevin had told her that if she wanted to talk about anything related to the wedding, she could contact him anytime. Jane thought she must have lost her mind because she really arranged to have a drink with this man she barely knew. Kevin was an excellent listener. Jane confided that she would be fully responsible for her sister's wedding, acting as the wedding planner, handling everything down to the smallest detail. Kevin keenly pointed out that Jane didn't know how to say no and always compromised with those close to her, which resonated with Jane's true situation. She remembered that she had always been accustomed to taking care of her sister and others since she was young, rarely considering her own feelings. Kevin noticed this too and suggested that Jane practice saying no with him as the subject. The first few times went smoothly, but she agreed to Kevin's requests when she got distracted. This episode cleared some of the gloom in Jane's heart. With Kevin's help, she felt a bit more uplifted. But soon after, Jane learned from her sister that the wedding was set to take place in 3 weeks. This was too short a time for preparing a wedding. Tess explained that she had booked the cruise restaurant where their parents got married and invited Jane's favorite author, Malcolm, to cover the wedding. All the elements Jane had hoped for in a perfect wedding, the cruise restaurant, her mother's wedding dress, and her beloved, had been snatched away by her sister. Jane looked at her sister's happy face and still couldn't bring herself to say no, especially since she would later personally plan her younger sister's wedding to her beloved. But more than that, she hoped for Tess's happiness. While selecting the wedding cake, Jane learned that Kevin was actually Malcolm. Jane felt a flicker of anger at being deceived. It was absurd that this man, who distrusted marriage, repeatedly depicted the romance and dreams of weddings in the newspaper. Kevin had not given up on using Jane, or rather, his promise to Tess to cover the wedding was just a way to use Jane to escape a job he disliked. Kevin came to Jane's house under the pretense of gathering material for the wedding. Sure enough, Jane did not disappoint him, and he quickly discovered the wardrobe filled with dresses. He knew Jane loved weddings, but he didn't expect her to be so obsessed. Living in New York, such a precious place, Jane had devoted an entire wardrobe to storing bridesmaid dresses and jewelry, which was truly crazy. He encouraged Jane to try on these dresses one by one for a showcase. This was the first time someone cared about Jane's wedding experience. 27 different bridesmaid dresses represented 27 uniquely styled weddings, styles ranging from Gone with the Wind to E.G. style, all dazzling. When talking about her favorite wedding, Jane spoke endlessly, unknowingly saying a lot, and Kevin happily took many photos. When Jane couldn't help but express her longing for weddings, the flash of Kevin's camera dazzled her eyes. Jane came back to her senses and realized that the man who had been chatting with her for a long time actually despised weddings. Jane understood she had gotten carried away and quickly composed herself. Kevin, on the other hand, lowered his head to apologize. Jane went to George's apartment to confirm the wedding gift list with Tess and inadvertently discovered that Tess was secretly hiring George's beloved brother, Pedro, to clean George's apartment. Jane felt a bit dissatisfied with her sister and worried whether Tess's concealment of the truth was appropriate. Meanwhile, Kevin was also wavering. He had completed the first draft but couldn't bring himself to hand it over to the editor. Jane was by no means the way he described her in the article, but he didn't know how to revise it. He couldn't determine how to define his feelings for Jane. Later, due to wedding matters, Kevin and Jane met again. Jane learned that Kevin despised weddings because he had once eagerly prepared for a wedding. only to receive news of his beloved and friends leaving. The two seemed to grow a little closer. However, there is always calm before the storm. Kevin inadvertently sensed Jane's feelings for George, and at that moment, he found the world absurd and ridiculous. Jane could wholeheartedly and personally help her younger sister plan a wedding with her beloved. He didn't expose her on the spot and held back until they erupted into an argument on the way back. Outside, lightning flashed and thunder roared, with wind and rain pouring down. Inside the car, the atmosphere was tense and charged. Distracted driving is the easiest way to get into an accident, and their car skidded, getting stuck in the MUD, i.e. the wilderness. With no signal on their phones, the two had no choice but to continue on in the rain, getting completely soaked, until they finally found a nearby bar. Perhaps the rain washed away some of the unpleasantness, and their emotions calmed down a lot. At least they could sit in the bar and chat like friends. Alcohol numbs the brain and frees the mind. Jane blurted out a question that had been swirling in her mind for a long time. Her favorite piece was Malcolm's report on Keller's wedding. The article was sincere in its wording and moving in its emotions. Only someone who truly loves weddings could write such a touching piece. Kevin admitted that there were indeed parts he liked. He liked how the groom always had a silly smile when the bride walked down the aisle. Jane was very surprised because that was also her favorite part. They surprisingly had common ground on the topic of weddings, which undoubtedly brought them closer. Memories flooded back, and the two sang and danced to the music, releasing themselves. The emotions gradually infected everyone present. When Jane reached out for Kevin to help her jump down from the bar, Kevin looked in her eyes and said that at Keller's wedding, he actually cried uncontrollably. When people are overly honest, they unconsciously draw closer, and they quickly kissed, naturally spending a wonderful night together in the car. The next day, they were met with teasing about last night's revelry and a maliciously filled report of the vows. The editor did not agree to Kevin's request and published the first draft in the most prominent place on the newspaper's front page. And her sister Tess was described as a crazed bride-to-be. Seeing the report, Jane finally understood that all of Kevin's previous intimacy and comfort were just to use her. She angrily slapped Kevin and turned to leave. Because of this report, Jane and Tess also had a quarrel. Especially when Jane discovered that Tess had unilaterally made significant changes to the wedding dress left by their mother, their relationship deteriorated to the extreme. But Tess did not think the quarrel was serious and still decided to let Jane be responsible for explaining the engagement banquet. Jane realized that this was her best opportunity to showcase her ambitions. She publicly revealed the photos and truths that Tess had concealed from George, exposing Tess's true nature. She looked at her sister and warned her that love should be based on mutual acceptance, not on concealment. Casey rushed onto the stage to prevent the situation from worsening, forcing a smile to lighten the atmosphere. But when Pedro came on stage, he revealed that Tess had hired him. The child, innocent and naive, did not understand the complexities of the adult world, but made the situation worse. George left on the spot, and the wedding seemed unlikely to take place as scheduled. Tess's engagement banquet was in chaos. Everything had been ruined that night. Casey questioned Jane about what was going on, and she admitted that she was not a righteous person, but this time Jane was indeed wrong. Because Jane was merely venting 20 years of repressed emotions under the guise of revealing the truth. If doing so was right, then was Jane feeling better now? Of course not. Jane did not feel happy. She was still in pain because she had hurt her sister. Jane's emotional breakdown led her to run out, with Kevin closely following. Jane couldn't understand how Kevin dared to appear in front of her again. It was all because of Kevin's report that she had argued with her sister. Because of Kevin's report, she had just ruined her own life. Yet Kevin insisted on having her listen to his explanation. For the first time in a long while, he genuinely wanted to support someone. He hoped Jane could have better, and he believed Jane deserved better. But if Jane was unwilling to see him again, he would leave. Just before leaving, he had to give the gift to Jane. This gift was more convenient for recording her favorite wedding details than a thick notebook. Watching the man walk away, Jane's emotions were in turmoil. She had ruined her sister's wedding and hurt her friends. Almost everyone was accusing her of being crazy, except for Kevin, who showed understanding. When a child is confused, they instinctively seek their parents' protection. Jane pleaded for her father's help, just as Tess returned. Her father immediately took a surrendering stance, stating that he couldn't help with matters between sisters. Tess was furious, accusing Jane of being jealous of her. Hearing the baseless accusation, Jane couldn't sit still anymore and stood up to scold Tess for deceiving George. As the argument escalated, Tess's emotions began to unravel as well. She shouted at Jane, saying that Jane had always taken care of her since childhood, and it had long since annoyed her. It was the first time Jane heard such an accusation from her sister. She had never been annoyed by taking care of Tess, no matter when. Tess was humorous, charming, and her life was flawless. Upon hearing Jane's response, Tess lost control and yelled. It turned out that Tess had returned not because she was busy with work, but because she was unemployed. Additionally, she had just ended a relationship. Meeting George was a stroke of luck for her. George was quite charming and treated her with sincerity. What Tess longed for was simply to be by George's side and to become someone worthy of his respect. To achieve this, she was working hard to make herself more like her sister. Jane was very confused. Her sister was already doing very well, so why did she want to become her? Due to their mother's early death, Jane had felt responsible for taking care of her sister since childhood. Tess was someone she had raised. In Tess's eyes, Sister Jane was a respected existence, the embodiment of goodness. She urged her sister not to always habitually take care of others. Her sister should think about what she wanted and take care of herself more. After returning home, Jane seriously considered her sister's and Kevin's words. She realized they were right. Once she understood, taking action became simple. Jane began to declutter. The first thing she did was empty her wardrobe, packing away all the dresses she once cherished. The second thing was to apologize to George at the company, and when George mentioned that she never refused his requests, she resigned. She expressed all the love she once had and found peace in it. She also realized that even if George kissed her, she felt nothing. What floated in her mind was Kevin, and she wanted to see Kevin immediately. She ran out to find out Kevin's location and hurried over. She found Kevin at a cruise wedding. Under the witness of everyone in the spotlight, Jane and Kevin's eyes met. She had never faced her heart so honestly as at this moment. Jane had always longed for her Prince Charming. Although Kevin was stubborn and strange, completely different from the prince she had envisioned, she even found sweetness in their arguments, which was undoubtedly love. And Kevin simply gazed affectionately at the woman in front of him. He had understood Jane's feelings, and all his unease and anxiety had dissipated. So he interrupted Jane's narration and invited his lover to take the final step towards him. A year later, Jane finally got her wish and welcomed her perfect wedding. The wedding was filled with happiness and joy. Tess started anew with George as her true self. Casey got her desired best man. As for the bride of the day, Jane wore her 28th dress. The first 27 were bridesmaid dresses, and this 28th one became her wedding dress. Amid the blessings of family and friends, Jane walked towards her lover Kevin. And Kevin had already become what he had said, someone who smiled foolishly with joy as the bride approached. Jane not only got the wedding she had always dreamed of, but also received much more than she had imagined. For instance, 27 bridesmaids besides Tess and Casey. All of them were brides whose weddings she had attended, and her friends wore her original bridesmaid dresses to be her bridesmaids. The grandeur of the scene was humorously described by newspapers as overwhelming to the guests. Happiness will not stop at this moment. It will last for a long time.